War brings change. We often think about it in terms of lands conquered, but there's much more to it than that. There are many reasons that we kill our neighbors: glory, security, wealth. And in 1879, for Chile, the War of the Pacific brought all of those things. But it also brought change. It signaled an end to the poop industry. The Atacama Desert is an undeniably inhospitable place. It contains the driest parts of our planet and has among the highest rates of UV exposure in the world. There's little water beyond the melt coming down from the mountains, and in turn, almost no vegetation. Life here is hidden in the corners, surviving in a way that seems all but impossible. Despite thousands of years of habitation, the people who live here have always seemed to cling together, with little spread beyond the major population centers. Gas stations are hundreds of miles apart. When driving across this land, you pass more dead towns than living ones. But the Atacama Desert is worth dying for. Many wars were fought for this land, and as the world changes, it wouldn't be all too surprising to see another march across its back. Because despite the cities crippled by homelessness, the vegetation clinging to life, and the bleached white bones of towns dead and gone, this is the land that blossomed the world. Off its coasts are islands covered in white. In its belly lies minerals that could make any garden bloom. This is the source of the world's sodium nitrate, the main ingredient of fertilizer. In the mid-1800s, the world was undergoing a rapid change. Former colonies had split and declared themselves independent, empires were seeing themselves coming up against the limits of their own conquest, and the scientific revolution was making discoveries at a rate unheard of in any generation that had come before. Chemistry, biology, and physics were lighting our cities, combusting our engines, and enhancing our wars. A scientific arms race had created an environment where the entire world was clamoring for new ways to utilize the advancements that seemed to be coming almost daily. One area of particular interest, especially to Europeans living on the brink of starvation, was in the field of chemistry. Nitrates had been discovered, and in conjunction with advancements in biology, it was clear that by adding them to the soil, farms could obtain previously unheard of yields. For a continent such as Europe, who was seeing population booms that required seemingly impossible increases in food resources, the value couldn't be overstated. Arable land was at a premium. As they often say, God wasn't making any more of it. What land they did have needed to be better used, and with nitrate, it could be. Nitrate's qualities were not new to the world, however. The Inca and their predecessors had long since known about its ability to enhance farmland. For nearly 1,500 years, they'd been adding it to their soil, treating it as a near religious resource. But they didn't know about the chemical, they knew about it as poo. Because nitrate's most common form was as guano. Specifically, the guano of the guanay cormorant off the coasts of modern-day Peru and Chile. This bird, living just off the coasts of the near-barren Atacama Desert, was ironically the world's best resource for making plants grow. In 1802, a European stumbled across the islands. Having learned from the local people about its garden-enhancing properties, he began a scientific study to determine how it could be tapped for Europe's benefit. In turn, he created one of the largest industries on Earth and fundamentally altered the history of the Atacama. Within a few short decades, guano industries based off the Peruvian model popped up in the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East, and the Americas. The United States even put into law that any island found covered in guano could be claimed for their now burgeoning empire, so long as nobody else had claimed it first. But none could touch the output of Peru. Islands covered in guano up to 150 feet deep were soon populated by tens of thousands of unsuspecting Chinese immigrants. Some workers would spend their entire adult lives digging mines deep into the solidified crust of ancient bird droppings. Much like the farms it was meant to support, the guano blossomed a nation. Peru's wealth grew 9 times over. Poo was big business. But the islands weren't to last. As their finite resources were becoming more and more scarce, in the desert's interior, miners were finding something that could outperform what the birds had naturally left behind. Beneath the sands of the Atacama, they found saltpeter, nitrates trapped in the rock. It would slowly but surely collapse Peru. Because the nitrate found in these rocks was valuable for more than just farms, it was gunpowder. It would mean larger, stronger, more devastating wars. Just as much as it had built up populations, the nitrate of the Atacama would be used to destroy them. With each new rock dug from the ground, another nail was put in the coffin of Peruvian guano and the national economy alongside it. It would take generations before the nation came remotely close to the wealth they had seen during the guano years. Soon, mining towns began to dot the desert in the hundreds. While Bolivia then controlled the majority of the Atacama, with little capital and a small population, it had trouble tapping into this new resource completely. Despite being theirs on paper, the desert was for the most part Chilean. Since a silver rush years before, Chileans had become the primary miners of the Atacama, and it was with their blood and iron that the saltpeter industry was built. As the interior roared past the heights once held by the islands, Bolivia made moves to take control. Signing a secret agreement with Peru, they prepared to claim the mines that the Chileans had built and return the wealth that was being sent south back to their own treasury. Obviously, this wouldn't sit well with Chile. In 1879, Chile declared war. After a series of battles that looked heavily weighted against them, they destroyed the armies of Peru and Bolivia and took control of the entire Atacama. Within years, they turned the nitrate industry into the most profitable enterprise that Chile had ever seen. White gold, as the nitrate would become referred to, would eventually account for 70% of all Chilean exports, comprising over half of their entire GDP. It locked up a majority of the national investment and sent thousands of unemployed workers to the desert looking to make their fortune. Hundreds of towns were born, cities blossomed, and like Peru before it, Chile experienced a boom beyond any it had ever seen. But just as war and chemistry had brought about the industry, it would be war and chemistry that collapsed it. Chile's control of nitrate accounted for such a large percentage of the world's output that its geopolitical interests became world-altering. By the start of the 20th century, nearly the entire world relied on Chilean exports, not just for their farms, but also their militaries. Without access to Chilean saltpeter, a nation would be at a distinct disadvantage in war. Artilleries are only as good as the gunpowder that makes them go boom. As the First World War reared its head in Europe, Germany began to realize that they were at a distinct disadvantage. British capital had been heavily invested into Chilean mines, and therefore British interests would be first and foremost when it came to exports. Germany would not be able to rely on their gunpowder reserves in such a long and arduous war, but at the same time, it was clear that without access to the Chilean market, they wouldn't be able to replace them when they ran low. They would need a new way. Luckily for them, one of their scientists had recently found a way to synthesize it. It was just incredibly costly, so little had been made of it up until that point, but the German war effort was willing to take the hit. As pragmatic as ever, they began building up an industry at a loss, knowing it would be necessary for their survival once war inevitably came. Soon, synthetic nitrate reached the point where its production nearly rivaled the costs of Chilean mining. But as the wars came to a close, the industry didn't. Unlike with the mines, the more time spent on synthesis, the lower the costs became. There was no digging down, but instead building up. Industrial development, economies of scale, and the natural learning process meant that each passing day saw another town collapse in the Chilean desert. For Chile, the timing couldn't have been worse. As soon as it was clear that changes would need to be made to survive, the Great Depression ripped through the world. There was no investment capital left to alter course. They were stuck in a decline that was spiraling out of control. And soon, the economy of Chile, which had grown accustomed to a near-monopolistic role in world affairs, nearly collapsed completely. Like with Peru before it, generations would pass before it could dig its way back to where it had once stood. Industries change. Be it from war, technology, scarcity, or simply no longer valuing the product, nothing lasts forever. War brought Chile to its economic height, and it collapsed it. The moral of this story, as I see it, is not to put all your eggs in one basket, especially when that basket is full of poop. This is Rare Earth. Even still, I don't think I can dunk on this.